Dear chess friends, I think we can agree that no one likes to lose in chess. I lost many games in chess in many different ways, but one of the most frustrating ways for me losing a chess game is when you lose a rook and pawn chess endgame in which you should have played a draw, in which you had a drawish position. Because I still think the rook and pawn chess endgames are so tough. Although there are not so many pieces on the board, the rook and pawn chess endgame has so many rules, has so many opportunities, has so many pictures and patterns to recognize in the later stage of the game. So it's really tough quest. So my suggestion also for you, but also for me, is then again to learn again the basic patterns of rook and pawn chess endgames, to read really the best chess endgame books, because sometimes you see also in top GM level, sometimes the top GMs don't recognize the common patterns in rook and pawn chess endgames. And that's exactly what happened in this game that I wanted to show you today. It's Magnus Carlsen against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov from the FIDE Rapid&Blitz Team Chess Championship in 2024. The game was played today, in my opinion, really a beautiful, strategic, and also great theoretic game, but then also with this common stupid rook and pawn chess endgame pattern. So let's see now what happened with the white pieces. Magnus opened with move e4, Shak's response was e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5. The Ruy Lopez, the Spanish game, is on the board. a6 Murphy defense, bishop to a4, knight to f6, hitting now the pawn on e4. Magnus castles, and now Shak goes now into the open Ruy Lopez with the move knight takes e4. Magnus of course opens the center because this king is still stuck in the center, so that's why we're searching for the clear e-file. b5, bishop to b3, and now d5, finally locking out now the position here in the center of the board. Magnus gets his pawn back. We have bishop to e6, queen to e2, and now after move knight to c5, Shak goes also for the bishop on b3. Magnus ignores it, simply plays on his d-file attack, is relying simply on his strength and of course on his much faster development, because we have to notice, of course, white is already secured by castling and also has a great activity so far with the pieces. Shak goes with knight takes b3. Why not? Giving up now the knight for a bishop creates of course now the position, and Shak continues now the game with the beautiful bishop pair. Knight a takes b3 opens up now the a file for Magnus, bishop to e7, and now c4. Magnus again uses this rook attack against the queen. If something clears, of course, on the d file, the queen could be endangered. We have now b4. Shak locks out now here the queen side. We have knight to d2, and now you could maybe try d takes c4, but actually it gives here good activity for white. After knight to c4, you have to step back, then the queen is coming, you have to do something like this. I don't know, but here white has really an optimal setup. Will simply develop, has, as I said, many open files that white has already occupied, so not a good continuation here for black. After knight from b to d2, that's why castling by Shak. Magnus again retreats with the knight, and now he clears again the dangerous d file. Queen to d7, bishop to g5. Good move, I would say, strategically by Magnus, forcing a trade of bishops, because the main strength of blacks is of course the bishop pair. We have rook from f to d8, c takes d5, bishop to d5, knight to e3, and now Shak goes into a line that has actually been played in chess history between Mladen Palac and Ante Brkic back from 2021, in which also here Palac took, and Brkic didn't play this line, played queen to e8, but here by Shak, queen to e6 has been played, and now we have reached a completely new position. And okay, the position is equal, nothing dramatic is going on. I think Magnus has still the bishop and a knight on the board, has maybe a slightly worse structure, but has now after bishop to e7 and knight takes e7 here the opportunity to attack the position. You see the queen is much more active than Shak's queen. Of course Magnus has to also worry about his b3 pawn, maybe also afterwards about his b2 pawn, but so far tiny little maybe advantage for white when it comes to really pure piece activity. So we have now queen takes e5, Shak grabs the pawn, Magnus grabs now also the pawn with a beautiful tactic. Queen takes a6, after rook to d1, rook takes d1, you cannot pick up the queen of course because you get checkmated on the back rank. So after queen to a6, Magnus noticed the basic problems in black's position, which is of course the back rank problem. After queen to a6, we have rook to d1, Shak goes now with rook to f8, and now Magnus plays queen to c4, centralizes the queen again, and has now good attacking chances to maybe grab one of these pawns, but he has to also, as I said, worry about both of these pawns here. On the queen side, we have c5. Shak improves now the position of the pawn, but still it's a backward pawn. Still it's something that bothers, of course, black. In the continuation, g3 by Magnus, clearing himself now the back rank problems. We have now h6, king to g2, queen to c7, and now h4. After rook to c8, Magnus plays a very interesting but also important move in endgames, h5. All of this pawn is now isolated, it's not defended by any pawns. It actually creates always this annoying escape route for the king. The king doesn't have such a great activity, and in chess endgames, of course, the king is supposed to play like an active piece, not something that you have to defend. So that's why h5, again, I would say equal position, but Magnus is squeezing something here. At least he's trying. If I think two top engines would play now this chess endgame, this game would for sure end with a draw, but it's human level, it's a faster, rapid time format. Let's see now what Magnus had in mind with this move h5. Queen to c6 here by Shak, attacking now the king. Magnus drops back, and now queen to e6, and that, again, a move that I would not say it's an inaccuracy, mistake, or blunder that Shak did, but unnecessary, I think, move to create a new weakness in the position after f takes e6. You have now a new weak pawn on e6, which was really unnecessary. Here Shak could have played, instead of queen to e6, a normal king to f8, but you see, with this move h5, already Magnus got into Shak's heads a little bit, because I think when Magnus played now the move h5, you feel a little bit pressured that you don't have spaces with your king, and that's why maybe Shak didn't want to go with his king towards the center. So that's why he tried maybe simplify the game. Okay, he says, I still have the same material on the board, so why not trade off the queens, why not simplify the game? And that's exactly now that gives here Magnus the opportunity to immediately attack the position. Again, nothing spectacular. Again, if black plays now the perfect endgame, again, this game should end with a draw. Knight to f5 here by Shak. We have knight takes f5, we have e takes f5, and again, a good choice here by Magnus. If he would have taken here immediately the pawn on e6, then Shak would probably take here the knight on e3, and after rook to e3, rook to d8, actually White has now problems because now finally Shak would liberate himself and would activate the rook on the second rank. And imagine just now this position when maybe Magnus takes both of Shak's pawns, and also Shak takes both of Magnus Carlsen's pawns on the queen side. Still, it's a draw, because when we have this 3 versus 2 pawn structure on the king side, with the rooks on the board, still it's a draw, because I'm not sure how to win this endgame for white. You have an extra pawn, but black's king is close enough to the action. So that's why very interesting choice here by Magnus to pick up the knight instead of picking up the pawn on e6. He realized that Shak could go into fully endgame stage with this idea, as I said, rook to d8, and then activate finally his rook. So that's why much better this choice by Magnus, simply playing rook to d5, which again neutralizes black's activity with the rook. Again, nothing spectacular. Again, it's not something that wins the game for white, but at least black feels a little bit pressured here. So at least he's giving here Shakhriyar Mamedyarov something to think about. After rook to d5, c4 by Shak, Magnus takes, rook to c4, rook to b5. Again, Magnus doesn't want to go for the pawn. He simply wants to overload this rook on that's the only, of course, active piece here in black's camp. f4 by Shak, we have king to g2, f takes g3, king to g3, and again equal position, but Magnus has maybe a slightly better king because the king has some kind of a path. King to f7, we have f4, king to f6, and now Magnus again activate the king on a good square. Rook to d4, b3, king to e6, rook to b8. Good move by Magnus, keeping an eye, of course, on the pawn here, but also with opportunities to deliver some checks or maybe attack here this pawn on g7. King to f6 by Shak, rook to b7. If you try here rook to e4 from black's perspective, now king to b6 is rook to b6 is going to happen. Then again the king is getting closer, so that's why for rook to b7, king to e6 played by Shak, not allowing here Magnus Carlsen to somehow get into the position. So rook takes g7. Magnus grabs now the pawn, but Shak had now a different idea. in mind when it comes to rook and pawn chess games. He goes now for this pawn on b3. Magnus goes, of course, with rook to g6, grabs now this pawn. We have rook takes b3, and again, if you play now the perfect endgame with the black pieces, this should be a draw, although Magnus Carlsen has now 2 pawns on the king side. But let's see now this really epic endgame. We have rook to b6, we have rook to b1. Now Magnus goes with king to f5, because the only way maybe for black to win the game is to push the pawn to b2, and then if the king is somewhere here or here where you can deliver a check, then you will deliver a check and then promote the pawn on b1. It's a common pattern, delivering a check, and then the rook is covering the first rank, and then you can promote. So that's why Magnus stays out of potential checks. It's not allowing some stuff like rook to f1 or maybe rook to g1 to happen. So b3, Shak pushes the pawn further. We have king to g8, king to f6. Magnus gets the king very close. b2, rook to b8, king to h7, and now after move f5 that Magnus Carlsen played, now comes the critical moment of the game. Maybe just for fun, if you like to study endgames, if you like this chess endgame puzzles, if you like chess endgame patterns, pictures, pattern recognitions, and similar stuff, pause the video and try to see now the drawish idea here for black. Black moves and makes a draw. What would you do now in this particular position? Okay, here Shakhriyar Mamedyarov played the bad rook to h1. It seems tempting and it seems so natural, and that's what I meant in the beginning. Rook and pawn chess endgames have their own rules. Rook to h1 is of course attacking the pawn, but let's see now really first of all the drawish idea. The drawish idea is to play rook to a1, giving up even another pawn. That's really crazy, you know, but as I said, rook and pawn chess endgames have really a different story here. Rook to a1 allows of course white to pick up now the pawn, but now we play king to h6, and now the only way maybe to spice up the game for white is to try rook to b8, to maybe even some lines deliver checkmate, but then you deliver check yourself, and then you can pick up this pawn. The only way again here for white to spice up the game is somehow to cut off black's king from the g file, so black cannot go closer with the king. But actually the issue is that the king is still close enough that white's king cannot go here to the square g5. White would love, of course, hide with the king on the g file and then push the pawn further. That's not possible because still the king is close enough to the action. Now in the potential line, rook to a7, we deliver just check on the 6th, 5th, 4th rank, and it's of course a thematic draw. Let's see different options. Instead of this move rook to b8 that we have now analyzed with the checkmate threat, you could try rook to h2, but now immediately black can go for this pattern, delivering checks on maybe 6th, 5th, or 4th rank. You're trying this one, will deliver checks, and now it's of course a thematic draw. So as I said, rook to a1 must move here for Shak to deliver these checks on the 6th, 5th, and 4th rank. But instead of this move rook to a1, he played now rook to h1, which seems, as I said, so natural that you're going for a pawn, but actually it's not working, and Magnus played now the mortal endgame. Look at this, what Magnus is doing. He picks up now the pawn, allows here Shak to take the pawn. But now after rook to b7, notice now that the king is out of game, king to h6, and now it's a different story. Magnus goes for this pattern again, forces Shak to go again to the square h7 because there is a checkmate threat. You cannot move the rook anyway. If you move it, of course, then we still deliver check and you lose, or at least the rooks will be traded off or something on the h file, and then with the pawn white is winning. So after rook to b8, Shak has to again go on the square h7, but now black's king is cornered, and it's a different story because after king to e6, Magnus has now the clear idea to push the pawn. We have now rook to h1, f6 by Magnus, rook to e1, and now we have king to f7, and now Magnus has secured the king here on a good square, on a very active square. After move f6 that Magnus Carlsen played, if Shak would have played here maybe the move king to g6, it's still not working because of this check, and then again you get here, but now white has this beautiful f7 move, and it's game over. You cannot stop this pawn, you cannot do anything. Maybe you can deliver a couple of checks, but we'll simply get out here out of potential checks, and in one moment this pawn will be promoted. Game over here for black. From move f6, that's why rook to e1 by Shak, but now Magnus has a good score for the king. Rook to a1, and now king to f8 here by Magnus. Again, allowing here this pawn to be pushed. And let's see again options for black. Black could maybe try here king to g6, but then f7, and you try maybe rook to a6 or something, then obviously king to g8, and we'll push the pawn, game over. Even if you try rook to a7 to somehow grab this pawn, then of course check first. You can maybe do this, but then a rook to f6 is actually winning the game. You cannot go towards this pawn because the king is controlling the king, and now after rook to a8 we simply clear the file, and now the threat is of course the promotion. You can of course deliver a couple of checks, but never really perpetuals, and in one moment f8 is going to happen again. Game over here for black. After king to f8, we have now rook to a7 by Shakh. Magnus pushes the pawn further. As I said, king to g6, and now of course check by Magnus, king to h7, and now rook to e6. Again with this pattern to cover yourself, but with the support of the pawn, which is very important here. Rook to a8 by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, rook to e8. Shakh goes again with the rook behind, and now Magnus is the threatening, of course, a very, very dangerous check. Rook to a8 by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov again the only moves, but now Magnus escapes, again a new check, and now after move king to f6, actually in this particular position Shakhriyar Mamedyarov resigned. The problem again here for black is that actually rook to h1 comes with the checkmate threat, so king to f6 is very important because it's restricting the king's ability, and also here the pawn is restricting the king's ability to escape, so that's why rook to h1 is a direct checkmate threat. You could maybe try now a check but then recover, and if you compete now on the 8th rank, then we have this idea rook to e8. As we mentioned, the pawn is supporting the rook, and game over here for black. Really interesting rook and pawn chess endgame, really stunning stuff. But as I said, these are completely different ideas when it comes to middle game strategies, opening theories. As I said, rook and pawn chess endgames, study them. I have to also study them. I missed many times some ideas how to maybe win a game in a rook and pawn chess endgame, how to make a draw in a seemingly losing position. So it's really tough to learn all of this pattern. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this endgame. Really again, Magnus squeezing water out of stone. Really a mortal again endgame by the chess endgame goat. I would say Magnus is really the best chess player of all times when it comes to chess endgames. Played now this amazing win and got a full point in this amazing chess event. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. If you want to see some other games that we have analyzed here on my YouTube chess channel, check out our Comte chess games, but also our Comte chess games played by computers, where I analyze some beautiful AI games. And if you like this content, hit the subscribe button. See you soon with some more videos, and what do we say in the end? Chess is the best, of course.